Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about red flags, standards, and non-negotiables in dating. So this question came from somebody who was having a discussion with who was basically saying, sometimes I can be picky when I'm starting to date people. And when I meet them, or if I'm talking to them on a dating app, sometimes I will sort of push away and find things I don't like and sort of pull back. And I don't know if, I should be giving people a chance, and how do I sort of define when I should give people a chance? And it sort of brought on this idea that there's so many things that happen when we're dating, and there's so many different dynamics to pay attention to. And sometimes we, don't trust our intuition. And sometimes we, second guess things. And sometimes we're like, oh, I see a red flag, and we bolt in the other direction when maybe we should have had a conversation about it first. Or sometimes we put up with things that we shouldn't. And there's so much that can be at play. And so, what I wanted to create here is a bit of a system to help you figure this all out if you're in the dating phase of a relationship and you're sort of figuring out the different dynamics at play and then what you can do about these things. So, number one, I want you to know that it is so important to have intentionality when dating. The more intentional you are, the more clear you are about what you want and what you don't want, the easier your entire dating process will go. So, what I always get people to do is start by defining what your non negotiables are in advance. Okay. And so these are the things that, like, no matter how great the person is, if this is a thing, then you decide, okay, I cannot be with them at all. For some people, an example of this would be like if somebody's vegan and they're like, I will only date vegans. And maybe that's somebody that maybe that's their non negotiable, right or wrong. And there isn't right or wrong. It's specifically up to that person, just so you know. It's specifically up to you doing this work. Maybe it's, somebody said to me the other day, if somebody's a hunter and hunting because they're an animal lover. And so it's, like for some people that's not a big deal, for some people it is. And it doesn't make the thing right or wrong. It means it only has to do with our personal relationship to that thing. Okay. So it could be a whole bunch of different stuff. It could be if people are cheating in all their past relationships. It could be if, you define, right? So take the time and really look. It could be if somebody is not willing to work on themselves and do emotional work, or if somebody's a poor communicator, if somebody uses certain swear words in a relationship or speaks to you in a certain way. It can be all those different things. I'm just giving off all these examples so you can like get your wheels turning. Okay. So number one, you want to define your non-negotiables. That makes life a lot easier, and you save a lot of time that might have otherwise been spent, getting to know somebody, then finding these things out way later, or then not knowing that it's a non-negotiable and sticking around for things that and you've defined your boundaries ahead of time you're actually not okay with. So write your list of non-negotiables. Then part of your job in the dating phase of a relationship is the vetting phase of a relationship. And what you're supposed to do is sort of figure these things out. And you don't sit down on like the first date and say, these are my non-negotiables. Do you have any? You don't like list them all off, but you ask questions indirectly that help to get that information. Like, what do you feel about this thing? Or, what kind of foods do you eat, or whatever it might be. You can start sort of assessing these things in advance. Okay. So that's number one. That will save you a lot of time. Number two, then we have a standards list. Okay, so these are things that are important to you, but not vital. And as I'm saying this, I want to be very clear that the goal here is not to have like a mile long checklist of what you don't want and what you do want. And then you are not allowed to date somebody until you find the perfect person with all these things on your checklist. No, that's never going to happen that way. The standards, non negotiables, we are like no matter what, and we're clear on that. And we have to show up for our boundaries accordingly. Standards are like preferences. They're like things that you very much prefer and that you're looking for and that are important to you in a relationship dynamic. But like, let's say, for example, you have a standard of somebody has to be emotionally literate, right? Like they're very good at communicating. And that might be really important to you. But maybe you see that the person has all these other things on the checklist and they're not great in that area, but they're willing to work on it. Okay. And then you're like, okay, so the standard's not met, but like we can grow into that together. So you make a list of your standards, and these can be all types of different things. And if you ever want to dive into this as well, like in all of our advanced attachment style courses are all about like how your attachment style will show up in each of the 6 stages of a relationship, but also how other people's attachment styles will show up in the 6 stages of a relationship. And it gives you like a roadmap. So you'll be able to navigate some of these things that come up more often. And this will also really help you to define your standards in advance. And it helps you as well to know the things that could be coming and to not take things personally when they do show up, because you're like, oh, the FA just moved into the honeymoon phase of a relationship. And that means they also sort of have one foot in the power struggle phase specifically. And so now that I know that, I'm aware that some of these patterns can pop up early, and it's not about me, it's about some of their internal unresolved wounds coming up. And now I can address it differently, right? So anyways, there's a whole roadmap for all attachment styles. It really helps to figure these things out. I will put a link to in the description box below too. um, the membership pass. So you can check those out. There is a money back guarantee as well. So you can go in there and scope it out. And if you don't get all this great stuff from it, then you get a refund. So check that out. So non-negotiable standards. And these are like the important things of preferences. And I also recommend, if you really want to get detailed, and not because somebody has to meet these things 10 out of 10 all the time, but so that you have this like internal navigating system that's helping you get clear when you're dating. And the clarity is so important, because with clarity, we know what to say yes to, we know what to say no to. We don't waste as much time, right? And we don't get connected with people who aren't going to be a good match, and then we end up in an unhappy situation that we're only going to leave anyways long term, and we really want to avoid that. So standards, and you can rate them out of 10 if you really want to get detailed. And the other thing about having your non-negotiables and standards, and there's one other thing still that I want to touch on here, but the other thing about having non-negotiables and standards is, like, when you have your non-negotiables, let's say you see a small flaw in somebody, and let's say you have a tendency to deactivate because you're either a DA or an FA. You know, let's say you see a small flaw, and there you are, you see a flaw in somebody, and let's say you notice yourself deactivating. Well, you can look and you can reference your non-negotiable sheet and be like, okay, this isn't a non-negotiable. So this means I'm deactivating. And this means I should work on my deactivation and be open and try to solve the problem, right? Just as an example. If there is a standard and so that's deactivating. If you have a standard and then you look and you're finding yourself hunkering for more closeness and connection, and maybe you're FA leaning anxious, or you're anxiously attached, then you can look at the standards and go, oh, somebody doesn't meet my standards. And so I'm activating, and I'm trying to get closer to them, but for what? This isn't even like the right person for me. They're not really lining up with my standards. They have non-negotiables for me. So it's time for me to move on. And so it helps you get clear between the difference between, like, is somebody a good fit for me or not a good fit? And am I just activating for no reason because this isn't what I'm going to want long term anyways? Or am I deactivating for no reason and just pushing people away because of my own internal fears? I have a long form video about deactivation as well. You can check that out if you need help working through that, and activating strategies too. So that's a really important sort of framework. And then when we look at red flags, we have to assess and find out if they are solvable problems. So a red flag isn't necessarily something we should see and then bolt in the other direction. A non-negotiable is. A red flag is basically a threat to your standards, right? Like, oh, this may take away from this standard here. Now, of course, if it's a red flag and it's something serious, like, somebody's physically abusive or something like that, well, hopefully that's a non-negotiable you have out, right? Obviously, if it's something like that, you leave, and anything unsafe, you bolt in the opposite direction. But I'm saying, like, if somebody uses words in conversation you don't like, right? That becomes something you go towards to address, to have a conversation, to gain clarity around, so you can figure out where it sits. So you might say, hey, I really would appreciate if we can communicate in this way instead of this way, right? And if the person takes action and wants to work on that with you and is open to that, then that turned into just a conversation you had that built and strengthened your relationship, and also shared your needs with another person so they could meet them, right? And vice versa, perhaps. So we want to, like, see that red flag, go towards it to have a conversation about it, figure out where it sits, and if somebody's willing to work on that thing with us, beautiful. If somebody's not, and then it becomes a really important standard that's not being met for you, then you can have the wherewithal to go, okay, then this isn't good for me and I can walk away. But this is sort of how we want to define these things in these different categories, because it gives us this awareness of what to do when we are, in certain situations, and things are brought to our attention, and how we can really navigate them in the confusing sometimes world of dating. So hopefully this all makes sense. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're getting a lot of value out of this channel, and I will see you in the next video.